What if you woke up one morning and the sky had changed? Not the color of it, not the weather, but what it contained. Imagine this. It's a Tuesday. You're running a little late, standing at your kitchen window, trying to coax the coffee machine to hurry up. You're looking out at the familiar cityscape, the familiar suburban sprawl of rooftops and treetops, when something drifts into view that doesn't belong. It's big, impossibly big. It's moving with a slow, deliberate grace that doesn't make any sense. At first, your sleep-addled brain tries to categorize it. A blimp? A very unusual, lumpy gray blimp? But then it turns and you see them. Ears, vast, fan-like ears, catching the morning breeze. And they are flapping. Not frantically, but with a steady, rhythmic power that seems to bend the air itself. You are, of course, looking at an elephant. A flying elephant. And it's not just one. As you stare, another one drifts into view, and then a third. They are silent, moving with the slow, unhurried purpose of clouds. This is how it began. Not with a crash, not with an announcement, but with a quiet, collective, global double-take. For the first few days, the world just stopped. News anchors fumbled for words. Scientists stammered on live television, and people just stood in the streets, necks craned, watching these impossible creatures navigate our airspace. They didn't seem hostile. They didn't seem interested in us at all, actually. They were just there. And after the initial shock, the first, most pressing question on everyone's mind wasn't, why are they here, but a far more practical and slightly absurd one. Is it safe to go outside without a helmet? And so began the great helmet age. Before the sleek, aerodynamic, pachyderm protection helmets became a fashion statement, there was a wonderfully awkward and inventive phase. Imagine your neighbor, a man who normally only ever wrestled with his lawnmower, emerging from his house wearing a modified colander on his head, complete with a hastily attached chin strap made from a bungee cord. Picture a businesswoman in a sharp suit, her look completed by an upside-down plastic salad bowl. These weren't acts of panic, but of pure, practical what-if problem-solving. It was a global moment of slightly comical trial-and-error adaptation. People shared designs online. The 5-gallon bucket method, the walk-as-a-shield technique. There was a shared, unspoken understanding that something fundamental had shifted, and the first, most immediate consequence was a potential for unexpected droppings. Of course, the helmet phase was just the beginning. The real story, the one that unfolded in the weeks and months that followed, was how we started to change everything else. And it all began with the roofs. You have to wonder what it was like for the first roofing contractor who got the call. Hello? Yes, I need a new roof. The old one is fine, structurally, but, well, it's not really elephant-proof. What does that even mean? Initially, it meant reinforcement. Simple enough. But then, an adolescent elephant, likely practicing its landing technique, misjudged the angle and slid down a perfectly good, newly reinforced suburban roof, taking all the asphalt shingles with it. The incident, which was captured on a dozen doorbell cameras, made it clear that strength wasn't the only issue. Texture was, too. This led to the invention of what became known as nudge nubs. A woman named Elena Vance, a ceramic artist from New Mexico, had the idea. She wasn't an engineer or an architect, but she knew materials. She noticed that the elephants, when they did land, seemed to test surfaces with their feet, a gentle nudge before committing their full weight. So, she designed a new kind of roofing tile. It was incredibly strong, a composite of ceramic and recycled polymers, but its real genius was on the surface. It was covered in smooth, rounded, fist-sized bumps. To a human, walking on a nudge-nub roof would be awkward, but to an elephant it felt unpleasant, like walking on a pile of lumpy, oversized marbles. It wasn't painful, not in the slightest, but it was just annoying enough to be discouraging. An elephant would touch down, give a little test nudge, and then, with a huff of what one could only assume was mild irritation, lift off again and find a more accommodating surface. Parks, fields, and the specially designated public landing zones that were starting to pop up in every town. Elena's invention didn't just change our roofs, it changed our aesthetic. Cities began to glitter with these new, lumpy, iridescent tiles. From the air, a suburb no longer looked like a flat, repeating pattern of gray and brown, but like the textured skin of some vast, sleeping lizard. The sound of rain changed too. Instead of a uniform drumming, it became a complex, multi-layered patter as drops hit the nubs at 1,000 different angles, a gentle, percussive symphony that became the new soundtrack to a rainy afternoon. And what about the trees? Elephants, it turns out, like to nap. They spend a good portion of their day feeding, but they do enjoy a good rest. And these new, airborne elephants found that the tops of the largest, sturdiest trees were ideal resting spots. Imagine a redwood or a giant sequoia, its upper branches now home to a sleeping 10-ton behemoth, gently snoring into the canopy. This created a whole new field of science, arbornautics. Botanists and engineers had to work together to develop trees that could withstand the weight. They didn't create new species, but rather new ways of supporting them. You'd walk through a park and see a beautiful, ancient oak tree, but if you looked closely at its trunk, you'd see it was subtly reinforced with a spiraling, carbon fiber lattice, almost like a corset. The branches themselves were often supported from below by elegant, arching buttresses that looked like part of the tree itself, a seamless blend of the organic and the man-made. The elephants, for their part, seemed to appreciate it. They had their favorite trees, and communities began to take a strange pride in their local elephant tree. It became a tourist attraction, a landmark. Turn right at the big maple, the one the elephants like, and our house is the third on the left. But with the elephants came new logistical challenges. They are herbivores, with an enormous appetite. In the early days, they would descend on farmers' fields, not with malice, but with a simple, direct hunger, and consume acres of crops in a single afternoon. This could have led to conflict, but instead it led to one of the most charming and unexpected new industries: high-altitude catering. The first person to try it was a former hot air balloon pilot named Gus. He had an old, rickety balloon and a crazy idea. He filled his basket with bales of hay, spoiled fruit from the local market, and giant bundles of leafy branches, and took off. He'd fly up near the cruising herds, cut the engines, and just drift alongside them, offering his wares. The first few attempts were clumsy. The elephants were wary. But Gus was patient. He'd just float there, letting the scent of bruised apples and fresh alfalfa drift towards them. And then, one day, a young female, bolder than the rest, extended her trunk and delicately plucked a single mango from his basket. After that, business was booming. Soon, the sky was dotted with these feeder balloons, silent, colorful ships drifting on the wind currents. They became the new food trucks. Each had its own specialty. Some offered vitamin-enriched hay bales for the health-conscious matriarch. Others specialized in sourcing rare, delicious tree bark, a known elephant delicacy. There was even a gourmet service that would carve massive salt licks into interesting shapes and hoist them into the sky, where they would hang like strange, edible chandeliers. This solved the crop problem, and it created a strange new symbiosis. We fed them, and in return, they gave us their presence, a constant, silent, awe-inspiring reminder that the world was a far stranger and more wonderful than we had ever imagined. But their presence also raised new questions. What frightened them? In a world where they were the biggest things in the sky, what could possibly bother a flying elephant? The answer, surprisingly, was thunderstorms. The first time a major electrical storm passed through a populated area after their arrival, we saw a new behavior. The elephants, who normally flew with a serene, almost lazy confidence, became agitated. They would trumpet, a sound that carried for miles a deep, resonant call of distress, and they would descend, not gracefully, but in a hurry, looking for any place to take shelter. This is how the first public elephant shelters were born. Imagine a structure that looks like a cross between an enormous aircraft hangar and a cathedral. Vast, open buildings with soaring, vaulted ceilings and floors covered in a deep, soft layer of sand and earth. They were built in parks, on the outskirts of towns, and in repurposed industrial areas. When the sky darkened and the barometric pressure dropped, the doors would slide open and the elephants would land, tucking themselves inside, their massive forms huddled together, waiting for the storm to pass. And people would come to watch. Not in a zoo-like way, but with a quiet reverence. You'd stand behind a thick, reinforced glass wall, watching these giants, their eyes betraying a primal fear of the lightning and thunder, just like any other animal. And in those moments, you'd feel a profound connection, a sense of shared vulnerability. Here were these creatures of impossible scale and grace, and yet they were afraid of the same things we were. It was a lesson in humility, delivered on a monumental scale. We had spent so long thinking we were the masters of our world, and then the sky filled with elephants, and we were reminded that we were just part of it. We weren't in charge. We were just neighbors. Neighbors who now had to remember to wear a helmet, to reinforce our roofs, and to build shelters for our very, very large friends when the thunder rolled. In the first year of the flying elephants, our world had learned to adapt in broad strokes. We learned to look up. We learned the simple, practical wisdom of helmets, the subtle discouragement of nudge-nub roofs, and the quiet necessity of storm shelters. We had, in a very real sense, made room for them. But making room is one thing. Living together, truly sharing a world, is another. And that process is always written in the smaller details, in the strange and wonderful solutions to problems no one had ever thought to have. And the biggest, most unavoidable problem was waste. An elephant's digestion is a fast and inefficient process. What goes in must come out, and when the animal in question weighs 10 tons and lives in the sky, that presents a unique challenge for those of us living below. The helmets and reinforced roofs were a good start, but they were defensive. Society needed a more proactive solution. As you can imagine, the first attempts were a masterclass in clumsy, hopeful failure. Think about the sheer ambition of it. A city council in Brazil tried stretching vast, drone-held nets between skyscrapers to catch the fallout. It worked once. The second time, a sudden gust of wind turned the net into a giant, messy sail, and the less said about the aftermath, the better. Another team, this one in Germany, developed a fleet of scooper drones designed to intercept falling matter midair. This led to a brief but memorable period of what news reporters called unfortunate smearing events on the sides of office buildings. These early, messy attempts were a necessary step, a humorous and slightly absurd phase of our collective adaptation. The real breakthrough came not from engineering, but from biology. A young entomologist named Dr. Eris Thorne had been studying dung beetles. He was fascinated by their efficiency, their tireless, single-minded purpose, and he had a thought, a what-if moment of his own. What if you could do that, but on a much, much larger scale? He didn't genetically engineer a new species. He simply crossbred. Patiently, meticulously, over hundreds of generations, he bred the largest and most robust varieties of beetle from around the world, selecting for specific traits. He wanted size, of course, but also a hardy constitution, an iridescent shell, and, crucially, a peaceful temperament. The result was a creature that was both beautiful and profoundly useful, the collector beetle. Imagine a beetle the size of a small dinner plate. Its shell shimmers, a deep, pearlescent blue, like an oil slick on water. They aren't silent. The sound of a swarm of them at work became a familiar part of the urban soundscape. It's a low, gentle, humming vibration, almost like a cello being played in a distant room. You'd be walking through a city park, and you'd hear that sound, look up, and see a dozen of these magnificent creatures spiraling down from the sky, their movements synchronized and purposeful. They would land, dismantle, and carry away their prize with a quiet, dignified efficiency, and then lift off again, their iridescent shells catching the sunlight. They were, in a word, elegant. But the true genius of Dr. Thorne's creation wasn't just in the collection, it was in the processing. The beetles didn't just eat the waste. They took it back to specially designed industrial hives, enormous, organic-looking structures on the edges of cities. Inside these hives, a complex biological process, aided by enzymes in the beetle's saliva, broke the waste down and reformed it into something new. It was a building material, a kind of natural, fibrous cement. People called it biocrete. The first time you see a building made of biocrete, you'd notice its warmth. It's not cold and gray like concrete. It has an earthy, terracotta hue, and if you touch it, it feels slightly warm and soft, almost like cork. It's incredibly strong, lightweight, and an amazing insulator. And it has a faint, pleasant, earthy smell, like a forest floor after it rains. An entire architectural movement grew up around it. Buildings began to lose their hard edges, taking on softer, more curved and organic shapes that suited the new material. Imagine a library whose walls curve and swoop like a gentle hillside, or a cafe with a vaulted ceiling that looks like the inside of a beautiful, sun-drenched cave. We were literally building our new world from the discarded scraps of the old, a perfect, gentle, and slightly strange circle of life. This new reality rippled outwards, changing everything it touched. Think about our vehicles. The age of the sunroof and the convertible came to a swift and decisive end. Car manufacturers began offering Skyview packages, not with glass, but with a series of small armored cameras on the roof that fed a panoramic display on the inside of the ceiling. It gave you a perfect view of the sky, with none of the risk. Car colors changed too. It was discovered that sudden flashes of bright color from below could sometimes startle a younger elephant. It wasn't a danger, more of a minor nuisance, like a fly buzzing around their heads. So, in a strange act of collective, voluntary camouflage, people started buying cars in muted, earthy tones. Greens, browns, grays. A morning commute, seen from above, no longer looked like a river of glittering metal, but like a collection of pebbles and stones rolling quietly along. Even our public transportation adapted. City buses were redesigned with gently curved, reinforced roofs, looking a bit like armadillos. And a new, slower, quieter form of travel began to appear, the Sky Tram. These were enclosed, silent electric trams on elevated tracks that wound their way through the city at treetop level. Their purpose wasn't speed, but coexistence. They moved slowly enough not to disturb the elephants, and they offered their passengers the most breathtaking views. Imagine commuting to work, gliding silently past a herd of elephants grazing on the leaves of a reinforced oak tree, so close you could see the gentle intelligence in their eyes. But perhaps the most wonderful changes happened in the world of our children. For them, this wasn't a strange new reality to adapt to. It was just the world. It was all they had ever known. Playgrounds were completely reimagined. Slides were now often shaped like long, curving elephant trunks. Swing sets were designed with large, comfortable seats that mimicked the feeling of riding on an elephant's back. Sandboxes became archaeological dig sites, where children could unearth faux fossilized footprints of flying elephants. Schools started conducting landing drills alongside their fire drills. The alarm wasn't a clanging bell, but a deep, resonant chime. When it sounded, the children wouldn't panic. They would calmly get up, form a line, and walk to the school's designated quiet zone, a reinforced part of the building, where they would wait until the herd that was landing in the nearby sports field had settled. It was taught not as a procedure of fear, but of respect, a way of giving our large neighbors the space and quiet they needed. Geography lessons now included tracking the great elephant migration patterns. Art classes were filled with drawings and sculptures of the majestic creatures that filled their skies. And a new kind of magic entered a child's life. Think about the simple, universal sadness of a child letting go of a balloon. You watch it float away, a tiny, receding dot of color, lost forever. But in this new world, something else might happen. Imagine a little girl in a park, her face crumpled in tears as she watches her red balloon drift up towards the clouds. But then, one of the elephants from a nearby herd, a curious young male, notices the strange, bright object. He alters his course, just slightly, and with an impossibly delicate movement of his trunk, he gently nudges the balloon's string, sending it floating back down towards the little girl's outstretched hands. There's no grand meaning to it. It's just a moment of gentle, unexpected connection. And that's what our world was becoming, a world of moments like that. We had moved beyond the initial shock, beyond the clumsy and humorous first steps of adaptation. We were no longer just reacting. We were starting to integrate. The awe was becoming a familiar comfort. The impossible had become the everyday backdrop of our lives, a constant, gentle reminder that the sky was not a ceiling, but a living space, a place of wonder, a place we now shared. We had built a world around them. Our architecture had softened, our transportation had quieted, and the sky, once an empty canvas, had become a living space we shared. We had learned to anticipate their needs for shelter from a storm, for a safe place to land, for a meal offered up into the clouds. We existed alongside them, a complex and beautiful dance of mutual respect. But coexistence is a calm sea. The true test of any relationship, any community, comes not in the easy days, but in the moments of vulnerability. And the day had to come when one of them would need our help. Imagine you're out on a quiet evening, sitting on a porch made from that warm, earthy biocrete. You're watching a herd drift by, their massive forms silhouetted against the deepening twilight. But you notice one of them is struggling. A young adolescent flying at the edge of the herd is listing to one side, its great wing-like ears beating with a strained, uneven rhythm. It lets out a low, infrasonic rumble, a sound you can feel more than hear, a deep thrum of distress in the pit of your stomach. The rest of the herd slows, circling back, nudging the young one with their trunks, trying to offer support. But it's clear that it can't keep up. It begins a slow, painful descent. In the early days, a scene like this would have caused a gentle, widespread panic. What could anyone possibly do? The first recorded incident involved a fishing town in Japan. A young elephant had tangled its leg in a drifting cargo net, a relic of the old world, and was forced down into the bay. The townspeople, in a remarkable display of improvised compassion, launched every boat they had. They tried to cut the netting away, a fleet of tiny vessels bobbing beneath the immense, frightened creature. It was a chaotic, beautiful, and ultimately clumsy effort. They succeeded, but everyone knew there had to be a better way. This singular problem, how to care for a creature that is both impossibly large and fundamentally airborne, gave rise to an entirely new field of medicine, and with it, a new kind of hero. The aeronautical veterinarian, or, as they came to be known, the ether vets. Their practice wasn't in a clinic on the ground. Their hospital was the sky itself. The solution, when it arrived, was as graceful as the elephants themselves. It was called the Manta Clinic. Picture a vast, semi-rigid airship shaped not like a blimp, but like a giant, gentle manta ray. Its outer skin is a soft, photovoltaic fabric that drinks in sunlight, powering the silent anti-gravity plates that give it lift. It doesn't have roaring engines. The only sound it makes is a low, subtle hum, a frequency deliberately chosen to be calming to the elephantine ear. When a call comes in, a distress signal detected by the global network of acoustic sensors that now listen constantly to the elephant's rumbles, a Manta Clinic is dispatched. You'd see it rise from its mooring on the edge of the city, a dark, silent shape against the stars, and glide towards the herd in distress. The first thing you'd notice is its gentleness. The Manta Clinic doesn't chase or startle. It approaches from below and to the side, slowly, patiently, matching the speed of the injured animal. Its surface is dotted with soft, warm lights that pulse in a slow, steady rhythm like a heartbeat. The lead ether vet isn't trying to capture the patient. They are offering a place to rest. Once alongside, the most delicate part of the operation begins. From the top surface of the Manta Clinic, a series of robotic arms emerge, but they don't look like industrial machines. They are covered in a soft, padded material and tipped not with claws, but with wide, soft slings. They move with an almost impossibly slow and fluid grace. They don't grab the elephant, they simply offer support. They slide the slings under the animal's belly and legs, taking its weight, allowing it to relax its strained muscles and simply float, tethered to this quiet, hovering island of care. The first ether vets were a strange and wonderful breed of pioneer. They were part doctor, part pilot, part animal behaviorist. One of the most famous was a woman named Dr. Lena Petrova, a former trauma surgeon who retrained, because, as she said, the challenges were just more interesting. She helped develop the tools of the trade. The diagnostic equipment couldn't rely on touch. Instead, they used long-range thermal and sonic scanners that could map the elephant's internal systems from a distance, projecting a holographic image of its body inside the clinic's command center. And what if they needed to administer medicine or a sedative? A needle was out of the question. You couldn't just jab an animal of this scale and sensitivity. So, they developed what they called mist darts. These were small, self-dissolving projectiles that didn't pierce the skin, but rather attached to it, and released a fine, concentrated mist of medication that was absorbed through the elephant's highly porous hide. It was treatment as a gentle fog, a quiet caress. This new medical necessity forced us to understand them on a deeper level. We had to learn their language, not a language of words, but of emotion and sensation. This led to the invention of resonance readers. These were complex sensors that could isolate the deep, infrasonic rumbles of a specific elephant and translate them not into speech, but into a visual spectrum of its physical and emotional state. On the holographic display in the Manta Clinic, a calm, healthy elephant would be represented by a slow, pulsing, deep blue and green light. An elephant in pain would show up as a tight, frantic flicker of sharp red and yellow. The ether vets learned to read these patterns, to understand the difference between fear, pain, and loneliness. It was a medicine based on empathy, translated through technology. This cascade of innovation trickled down into our everyday lives. The technology developed for the Manta clinics found other uses. The silent anti-gravity plates were adapted for public transportation, leading to even quieter and more efficient skytrams. The non-invasive medical scanners were miniaturized and started appearing in our own hospitals, allowing doctors to diagnose patients without a single touch. And, entirely new, gentle occupations continued to emerge. As the elephant population grew and their migration routes became more established, a need arose for a new kind of air traffic controller. They weren't there to command, but to guide. They were called migration guides. Their job was to monitor the herds and the weather patterns, and to gently encourage the elephants away from populated flight paths, not with loud noises or fences, but with pleasant incentives. This gave rise to one of the most whimsical jobs in the New World, the updraft gardener. These were people who cultivated specific fragrant gardens on the tops of skyscrapers. They planted species of flowering herbs like giant lavender, silverleaf eucalyptus, and a new hybrid called sky mint that, when warmed by the sun, released powerful, pleasant-smelling thermal updrafts. Elephants, it turned out, absolutely loved to surf on these warm, fragrant air currents. A migration guide, noticing a herd drifting towards a busy shipping lane, would simply activate the irrigation systems on a garden 2 miles to the north. A few minutes later, a beautiful scent would drift on the wind, and the herd would gently, voluntarily, alter its course, seeking out the pleasant sensation. Our skies were now managed not by rules and restrictions, but by strategically deployed pleasant smells. Imagine you're a child again, lying in the grass, looking up. The world isn't just a place of buildings and cars below and empty sky above. It's a complete living ecosystem. You see a herd of elephants drifting lazily overhead. You see the shimmering, iridescent shells of the collector beetles going about their quiet work. And then you see the dark, silent shape of a manta clinic, moving alongside the herd, its soft lights pulsing. It isn't a frightening sight. It is profoundly reassuring. It's a symbol of this new world we'd built, a world where our cleverness was used not for dominion, but for care. A world where we had learned that the greatest strength wasn't in how we could control nature, but in how gently we could hold it when it needed our help. In a world that had learned to heal its largest inhabitants, a new and deeper quiet had settled. We had learned their rhythms, their fears, their needs. The relationship had moved beyond simple adaptation and into a state of active, gentle care. But every true relationship is a two-way street. We had given them safety and sustenance, and what we began to receive in return was something more than just a sense of wonder. It was a gift, freely given and unintentionally bestowed, that would once again reshape our world from the ground up. It began, as these things often do, with a quiet observation. An elderly woman, a retired botanist named Inez, was tending to one of the high-altitude updraft gardens on the roof of her apartment building. She was pruning her sky mints when she saw it. Draped over the branch of a reinforced silver birch like a piece of discarded silk was a vast, translucent sheet of something. It was almost invisible, shimmering in the morning sun. Her first thought was that it was a piece of plastic, a stray bit of litter carried up on the wind. But as she approached, she saw it was different. It was impossibly thin, yet it held its shape. The texture was a delicate, intricate web of fibrous patterns, like a dragonfly's wing magnified 1,000 times. And it was huge, easily the size of a small car. She reached out and touched it. It was cool, smooth, and incredibly light. As she gently lifted a corner, the entire sheet billowed in the breeze with a soft, rustling whisper. Inez knew, with a certainty that settled deep in her bones, what she was looking at. It was shed skin, from the ears of an elephant, a natural, harmless, discarded piece of their miraculous biology. This discovery sent a gentle, excited ripple through the scientific community. The material was analyzed, and its properties were found to be astonishing. It was stronger than carbon fiber, but weighed almost nothing. It was breathable, UV-resistant, and when stretched, it became a phenomenal acoustic buffer. But most remarkably, it was photosensitive in a way no one had ever seen. It didn't just block light, it seemed to capture and diffuse it, glowing with a soft internal luminescence for hours after the sun went down. They called it ether hide at first, But that name felt too primitive, too harsh. The name that stuck was Sky Silk. And so a new profession was born, one that was part forager, part artist, and part meteorologist. The harvester. Imagine a harvester at work. They don't track the elephants with drones or vehicles. They track them with patience. They know the migration routes, the favorite napping trees, the updrafts the elephants like to ride on lazy afternoons. Their tools are simple: long, lightweight poles with soft, padded loops at the end, and large, collapsible baskets woven from the same material. You'd see them in the early mornings, walking through the reinforced forests or gliding silently on elevated platforms to the rooftops of biocrete buildings, their eyes cast upwards, reading the branches like a scholar reads a book. Finding a sheet of sky silk was a moment of quiet reverence. A harvester would never tear or force it. They would use their long poles to gently nudge and unhook the sheet from the branches, letting it drift down into their baskets like a falling cloud. The early days, of course, were full of humorous miscalculation. People tried using nets, which invariably got tangled. One ambitious group attempted to use a giant fan-powered vacuum, which ended up sucking up the sky silk along with a great deal of foliage, 2 park benches, and a flock of very surprised pigeons. But like all things in this new world, we learned that force was the wrong answer. The right answer was always gentleness. The discovery of sky silk created a new economy, but it was an economy of quiet craft, not mass production. The material couldn't be manufactured. It could only be found. This inherent scarcity gave it immense value, but it also fostered a culture of profound respect for the material itself. You didn't waste sky silk. Every scrap was precious. Its first and most dramatic application was in architecture. Imagine a bustling city market, once open to the elements. Now imagine it covered by a vast, single canopy of sky silk. It's stretched between the biocrete buildings, billowing softly in the high-altitude winds. The light that filters through it is soft and golden, like a permanent afternoon. There are no harsh shadows, just a gentle, uniform glow. And it's quiet. The roar of the city is muted, transformed into a low, pleasant hum by the canopy's acoustic properties. When it rains, you don't hear a clatter, but a deep, resonant drumming, as if you're living inside a giant, beautiful drum. It changed how we lived with light. Homes started to be designed with luma walls, entire walls made from stretched panels of sky silk. During the day, they would flood the room with diffuse natural light, and at night, they would release that stored sunlight in a soft, pearlescent glow, eliminating the need for harsh electric lighting. You could fall asleep in a room that felt like it was lit by the moon. But its most soulful application was in the arts. Artists discovered that paint didn't just sit on top of sky silk. It could be infused into its fibrous layers. This allowed for the creation of paintings that had a true, breathtaking depth. You wouldn't just look at a painting of a forest. You would look into it. The trees in the foreground would be in one layer, the mountains behind them in a deeper one. The sky in the deepest layer of all. The entire piece would shift and change, depending on how the light hit it. Galleries became places of silent, meditative wonder, rooms filled with floating, glowing canvases that seemed more like windows into other worlds than simple paintings. The material even changed our relationship with sound. Its unique structure, a perfect lattice for trapping and dampening sound waves, made it the ultimate material for concert halls and libraries. Imagine a library where a dropped book makes only a soft thud, where conversations are absorbed into the very walls, creating an atmosphere of profound and gentle silence. Or a concert hall, where every note is perfectly clear, where the music seems to hang in the air, pure and unblemished by echoes. And a new instrument was even created. It was simple. A series of sky silk sheets of different sizes and thicknesses stretched over a frame like a loom. When the wind or a gentle hand passed over it, it didn't produce a distinct note, but a chord of whispers. A complex, ever-changing sighing sound that was found to have a deeply calming effect. These ether harps became common in public parks and quiet spaces, the new, gentle soundtrack of our shared world. You have to wonder what it would feel like to be a child growing up in this reality, to learn that the most beautiful and useful material in the world wasn't mined from the earth or forged in a factory, but was a gift shed from the wings of the giants who swam through the sky. It would teach you a different kind of value. That value doesn't come from conquest, but from observation, not from taking, but from receiving. You might be walking home from school, and a small, translucent scrap of sky silk, no bigger than your hand, might drift down and land at your feet. You'd pick it up. You'd feel its impossible lightness. You'd hold it up to the sun and see the light bend and soften as it passed through. And you'd put it in your pocket, a small, found treasure. A quiet reminder that you live in a world where magic is real, and it simply falls from the sky. Our world had found its new shape. We had built our homes from their leavings. We had learned to heal them in the open air, and we had woven their shed and shimmering skin into the fabric of our lives. We had made a space for them in our world. But the most profound change was not in what we built, but in what was being rebuilt inside of us. For years, we had been watching them, and slowly, unconsciously, we had started to learn from them. It didn't happen overnight. There was no single moment of revelation. It was a slow, creeping, and gentle change, a phenomenon that sociologists would later call the Great Slowing. Imagine you are a stockbroker in the old world. Your life is measured in milliseconds, flashing numbers, frantic calls, a constant cortisol-fueled race against a clock that never stops. Now, imagine that same person, 10 years after the elephant's arrival. Their office is a quiet space, walled with glowing sky silk. They are sitting, not hunched over a frantic screen, but looking out a vast window at the open sky. They are watching a young elephant, no bigger than a city bus, practice gliding on a thermal updraft created by a rooftop garden below. The elephant rises, dips, and rises again, learning the feel of the air with an unhurried, focused patience. And the stockbroker is learning, too. They are learning that not every decision needs to be made in a fraction of a second. They are learning that there is a deep and powerful wisdom in observation, in waiting for the right current. The frantic, day-trading mentality of the past now seems not just stressful, but inefficient, like a hummingbird trying to teach a mountain how to move. This was the beginning. The frantic pace of the pre-elephant world began to feel embarrassing, a little foolish. The constant rush, the obsession with immediate results, the relentless 24/7 cycle of news and work, it all started to look like a strange and unnecessary panic when contrasted with the slow, deliberate, and deeply ancient rhythm of the herds that drifted above. The first, clumsy adaptations to this new feeling were, as always, slightly humorous. Corporations, sensing a shift in the wind, tried to institutionalize calmness. They introduced mandatory mindfulness minutes and scheduled serenity sessions, which were met with the collective, quiet eye roll they deserved. But eventually, the change came, not from the top down, but from the inside out. The 9-to-5 workday, that rigid cage of time, began to dissolve. It was replaced by a more fluid, task-oriented approach. Why measure a person's contribution by the hours they are sitting at a desk? Productivity began to be redefined. It wasn't about the volume of work, but its depth and quality. The elephants, when they foraged, were models of focused, deliberate effort. We began to emulate them. The concept of deep work became the cultural norm, and offices were redesigned to accommodate it. Picture a new workplace. The loud, open-plan offices of the past are gone. They have been replaced by clusters of quiet, semi-private pods, their walls made from sound-dampening biocrete. There are communal observation lounges, with vast ceilings of sky silk, where people can go to simply watch the sky and let their minds drift. The goal is no longer to maximize activity, but to cultivate focus. And the sound of work changed. The incessant ringing of phones was replaced by the soft chime of text-based messages. Loud conversations became a thing of the past. In fact, cities themselves began to fall quiet. Spurred by the naturally sound-dampening properties of our new building materials, a movement began to create entire quiet zones, districts where loud noises were not just frowned upon, but actively discouraged. Imagine walking through the center of a major city at what used to be rush hour. There is no roar of traffic. The sky trams and muted color cars are nearly silent. There is no cacophony of voices, no blaring music from storefronts. The loudest sounds are the rustle of the wind in the reinforced trees, the distant cello-like hum of collector beetles, and the soft whisper of footsteps. People still communicate, of course, but they do so more intimately, speaking in lower tones or using personal devices that deliver sound without broadcasting it. A conversation becomes a small circle of shared quiet, not a public announcement. This external quiet began to seep inwards. With less noise bombarding our senses, there was more room for our own thoughts. And a new philosophy, a new way of seeing the world, began to spread organically. It didn't have a formal name at first. Some called it the way of the herd, others gentle observation. It wasn't a religion, it was a shared understanding. An understanding that patience is a virtue, that community is essential for survival, and that there is a profound strength in moving slowly and deliberately. It changed what we valued. The pursuit of frantic entertainment was replaced by a pursuit of quiet contentment. New public spaces were designed not for spectacle, but for stillness. Imagine a park, not with playing fields and loudspeakers, but with winding paths that lead to contemplation nests. These are small, beautifully crafted pods woven from biocrete fibers and lined with a soft layer of moss, designed for 1 or 2 people to recline in. They are angled perfectly towards the sky. They became the city's most popular new feature. You would see people of all ages lying in these nests, not talking, not reading, but just watching. Watching the clouds, watching the beetles, watching the elephants. And as the world grew quieter, so did our minds. The constant, low-grade anxiety that had been the background radiation of modern life began to dissipate. With less to react to, our nervous systems began to heal. This was most apparent in the one place our minds are truly our own, our dreams. Therapists and psychoanalysts began reporting a profound shift in the collective subconscious. The common anxiety dreams of the past, dreams of being chased, of falling, of being unprepared for an exam, were becoming rare. They were being replaced by a new archetype. Imagine a therapist, a dream weaver, as some were now called, listening to a patient. The patient is describing a dream not of fear, but of tranquility. They dreamt they were floating, weightless and calm, high above the earth. They weren't afraid. They were drifting on a warm current of air, and all around them were the great, silent shapes of the elephants. They weren't just watching the elephants. They were part of the herd. They felt a sense of belonging, of peace, of moving with a slow, effortless, and unbreakable purpose. These dreams became a cultural touchstone. They were a sign that the change wasn't just on the surface. We hadn't just built a new world. We were becoming a new kind of people. Quieter, calmer, more patient. We had spent so long looking up at these impossible creatures in our sky. and in doing so, we had finally learned to look inward. We found a stillness there that we never knew was missing. It was the elephants' greatest gift, a gift they gave without ever knowing it. They didn't just teach us how to live with them. They taught us how to live with ourselves. We had arrived at a place of quiet. The great slowing, as it was now known, had settled into the very bones of our society. The frantic energy of our past, the relentless hum of anxiety that we once accepted as the price of progress, had faded. We had learned to measure our days not in the frantic ticking of a clock, but in the slow, deliberate passage of the great herds across the sky. Our world was quieter, our minds were calmer, and our dreams were filled with the feeling of weightless flight. We had, in our own clumsy human way, found a kind of peace. But the story of life is never about finding a final state of being. It is about the constant, gentle, and unending process of becoming. We had adapted to them, and they, in turn, had adapted to us. But there was a new chapter beginning, a new and wonderful complication that would deepen our relationship in ways we could never have anticipated. For the first time, a new generation of elephants was being born into our sky. A generation that had never known a world without us. Imagine you are one of the first people to witness it. You are a resonance listener, stationed at an observation post high in the Andes. Your job is not to watch, but to feel, translating the deep infrasonic rumbles of the herds into a visual tapestry of their emotional state. For weeks, you have been monitoring a specific herd. The deep blue and green lights of contentment on your console have been interwoven with a new pattern, a gentle, pulsing, protective warmth of soft pink and gold. It's the color of anticipation. Then, one morning, it happens. The herd gathers into a tight, slow-moving circle, a great living fortress in the sky. In the very center, shielded from the wind and the world, a calf is born. There is no sound a human ear could hear, but on your screen, the signal is overwhelming. A sudden, brilliant flash of pure white light, the color of new life, the color of pure joy, rippling out from the herd and echoing across the entire global network. These new elephants, the first of the skyborn, were different. The original arrivals, the first herd, always carried with them a certain aloofness, a quiet and dignified distance. They were our neighbors, but they were also our elders, ancient beings from a place we could not comprehend. These new calves, however, were born into a world where biocrete buildings were as natural as mountains, where the hum of a collector beetle was as common as the buzz of a bee, where the silent, gliding manta clinics were simply a part of the landscape. They were born into a world where we were a known quantity. And so, they were curious. You have to wonder what it was like for the driver of a sky tram in Singapore. He's gliding along the elevated track at treetop level when he sees a young elephant, no bigger than a small house, detach from its mother and drift closer. It's not threatening. It is purely, wonderfully inquisitive. The calf lowers its head, and its vast, dark, intelligent eye, an eye the size of a dinner plate, blinks slowly, looking at the faces of the passengers pressed against the reinforced glass. Then, with an impossibly gentle touch, the tip of its trunk taps against the window, not with force, but with the light, exploratory pressure of a child's finger. It leaves a small, dewy smudge on the glass before its mother rumbles softly, calling it back to the herd. These moments began happening all over the world. A young elephant might spend an afternoon seemingly mesmerized by the way sunlight shimmered and glowed through a sky silk canopy over a city square. Another might be found gently nudging the spinning blades of a wind turbine, feeling the strange, rhythmic vibration on its trunk. They were exploring their world, and we were a fascinating part of it. This ushered in a new, gentle era of what was humorously termed interspecies childproofing. Architects began designing buildings not just with nudge nubs to discourage landing, but with rounded corners and soft, yielding surfaces at lower altitudes, just in case a curious calf drifted too close. The operators of the updraft garden started cultivating plants that released scents found to be especially soothing and intriguing to young elephants, turning their rooftops into interactive sensory playgrounds. We weren't just accommodating them anymore, we were actively trying to delight them. This growing familiarity required a deeper level of communication. The resonance readers, once a purely medical tool, evolved. The new generation of listeners were less like technicians and more like artists or musicians. They learned to move beyond translating raw emotion and began to recognize intentions, simple concepts, a nonverbal language of shared feeling. Imagine a listener, an old man now, sitting on a quiet platform that extends from the side of a cliff. He isn't looking at a screen. The technology is now woven into the very fabric of his chair, translating the herd's rumbles into a series of gentle, haptic vibrations and a symphony of soft, colored lights that play across a pool of water at his feet. He's been listening to this particular herd for 50 years. He knows their history, their personalities. He can feel the matriarch's weariness after a long flight, the boisterous energy of the young males, the deep contentment of the herd as they find a current of warm, fragrant air. One day, he feels something new, a clear, distinct signal, not of distress but of purpose, a message. The herd is turning south, away from its usual migration path. The listener checks the weather patterns, the atmospheric data. There is no storm, no logical reason for the change in course. But the signal from the herd is calm and insistent, a soft, repeating pulse of deep indigo light, the color of memory. They're going somewhere specific. He sends out a quiet alert. Across the globe, other listeners confirm the signal. The great herds, all of them, are slowly, deliberately beginning to converge. They are heading towards the remote, high-altitude plateaus of the ancient world, the places we had long ago designated as sanctuaries, the places we called the Isles of Repose. And the listeners, through their gentle haptic language, finally understand. They are bearing witness to the most profound and sacred of all journeys. One of the first herd, an ancient, magnificent matriarch who was already old when she first appeared in our skies, was nearing the end of her long life, and she was choosing to go home. What happens when an elephant dies had been a question whispered in quiet awe for decades, and the answer, when it came, was not a tragedy. It was the most beautiful and life-affirming act we had ever been privileged to witness. The journey took weeks. The world watched in a state of shared, silent reverence. All non-essential air traffic was grounded, not by law, but by a simple, unspoken consensus. The sky was theirs. The herds moved slowly, supporting their elder. When she tired, 2 younger elephants would fly beneath her, their massive backs providing a living platform for her to rest upon. The manta clinics followed at a respectful distance, their lights dimmed, their presence a silent offer of support that was never needed. The matriarch finally led them to a vast, green caldera, a hidden valley on an island that had never known a human footstep. There, surrounded by the family she had led for over a century, she laid down. The listeners, watching through their remote sensors, felt no pain, no fear. They felt only a vast, deep, and peaceful release. A single, pure note of white light, like the birth of her descendants, but this time it was a light that didn't flash. It simply glowed, and then, very slowly, faded into the deep blue of memory, and was gone. The herd did not leave. They stayed for days, a silent, circling vigil. And this is when we witnessed the final and most astonishing piece of the puzzle. This is when we learned the true meaning of the elephant fall. Her body, a vessel that had gathered sunlight and consumed the vegetation of 1,000 different ecosystems, did not simply decay. It began a process of miraculous transformation. The unique biome of her gut, combined with the minerals absorbed over a lifetime, began to interact with the soil. The first things to arrive were a specialized and previously unknown species of collector beetle, their shells not the pearlescent blue of the common variety, but a deep, shimmering emerald green. They were not there to consume, but to cultivate. They burrowed into the ground around her, aerating the soil, their movements part of an ancient, symbiotic ritual. And then things began to grow. Within a week, a soft, phosphorescent moss, glowing with a gentle blue light, had carpeted the ground around her. Then came the fungi, strange and beautiful structures that spiraled up like crystalline sculptures, releasing spores that shimmered in the air like dust motes in a sunbeam. And then the flowers. Flowers no botanist had ever catalogued. Blossoms that opened only at night to drink in the starlight, petals that had the texture of sky silk and the colors of a nebula. Her body was not a grave. It was a garden, a single monumental act of creation. The listeners and scientists who watched, spellbound, realized the truth. The elephants were more than just inhabitants of our planet. They were its gardeners, its cultivators. They were the slow, gentle, and deliberate agents of planetary biodiversity. They spend their long lives gathering the world's life force, and in their final act, they return it, concentrated and transformed, creating a cradle of new life, a burst of evolutionary potential. We finally understood. The question was never, why are they here? The question was, what have they been doing all this time? And the answer was simple. They were tending to the world. And in their arrival in our skies, they were simply extending their garden and inviting us to tend to it with them. The knowledge of the elephant fall changed us for the last time. Our quiet reverence for them deepened into a kind of spiritual partnership. The Isles of Repose became our most sacred sites, places of pilgrimage not for what was lost, but for what was being born. We began to see time differently, not as a straight line of human progress, but as a vast, slow, repeating circle of life, death, and rebirth. And so, the story finds its quiet resting place. But of course, it doesn't end. A story like this never ends. It simply joins the rhythm of the world. Imagine, one last time, that you are here now. You are lying in a contemplation nest on a warm evening. The biocrete beneath you is still warm from the day's sun. The air is sweet with the scent of the sky mints blooming on a nearby roof. You look up. The first stars are appearing, but they are not the only lights in the sky. To the east, a manta clinic is a slow-moving constellation of soft, pulsing lights, accompanying a herd on its long journey south. Above you, a young sky-born calf, full of a gentle and boundless curiosity, leaves a fleeting, misty trail as it glides through a patch of high-altitude cloud. The wind shifts, and from a park across the city, you hear the faint, whispering sigh of an ether harp, playing its quiet, endless song to the sky. The world is full of a gentle, living magic. It is a world we did not conquer, but a world we were invited to join. We only had to learn to be quiet enough to hear the invitation, to be slow enough to accept it, to look up and to find our place, not as masters of the world, but as fellow travelers, inhabitants of a shared and wondrous sky. And in that quiet, shared peace, you can finally close your eyes. You can feel the gentle, steady rhythm of the world, and you can drift off to sleep.